Hi, everybody, and welcome to this webinar on Wordfast Pro 5 for beginners. My name is John DeRico, and we're going to get started right away. I'll take a document that I have, and I can either click on the Create Project button, or I can drag and drop it directly into Wordfast, and it's going to launch the project creation wizard. And not only does it launch the project creation wizard, but it also adds that document to the project that I'm going to create. There are several different ways to set up your projects in Wordfast. Some people, they decide, I mean, if it depends on who you are, where you work for. I would say somebody who's in an internal company or an internal translator in a company might just have one project and open that every single day and add files to it and translate them within that project. If you're a freelance translator and you have multiple different clients, you could create a separate project for each different client and language pair if you do multiple language pairs. And the last way would be to actually have unique projects each time you have a project. And that's what I would do. And the reason I do that is because it gives me a lot more leeway to use some of the other more advanced features in the tool if I'm going to be working with colleagues or other people. So in order to do that, I have a unique project name for each project. And so I usually start out with the year 2020, so the 20 here, and then 10 for October, and the number of the project. So let's say this is the 9th project of the month. And I also specify that it's English source language because I might have a multilingual project. And then I'll talk about who I'll put in the name of the client. So let's say this is Acme. And then I put a hyphen and some sort of keywords about this particular project that help me recognize it. So basically, it's Shakespeare, what's in a name? And what I put in my name of my project really helps me identify what's in that project. So I have a timestamp in there. I have a unique project identifier number because it's always going to be increasing. I know what the source language for that project is. I know what client it's for, and some key information about the project. There's no right or wrong way to do things. There may be better ways. You see that there's an asterisk here, so I have to have that a project name. I also have to maybe specify the location that I'm saving that project to, and you can save it on a different location than the default location. I use the Google Drive for it, and I don't have any problems. I know that some of you might have got a warning message, especially on PC, that advises you against using cloud drives and cloud storage systems. I know that there have been problems when people are synchronizing between two computers, so that's definitely something you don't want to do. I've been using Google Drive to save my projects and haven't had any problems for the past 5 or 6 years, 7 years. But I can't say the same for other cloud storage systems. So I've specified my source language, my target language, that's okay. And I want to create my translation memory. So I will create a translation memory, and I'll put in the name of my client, Acme, and I'll put the source language, and then I'll put reflex French to English, which is what I typically translate into. So FR. And at the end, I'll write in WFM. So this is what I call my translation memory. I have my client's name in there. I have the source language. I have the target language. And I also know that it's a Wordfast translation memory. And I've got these underscores in there, so it makes the memory look kind of strange if ever I come across it on my computer stored somewhere. And I'll know really quickly that that's a database file. And I also know that it's a memory because it has WFM at the end. So before creating that, I'll copy it. Just a little tip, and I'll show you why in a second. And I can see I've got a location where I'm going to save that. This is something important. Make sure that you determine a location on your computer. This is probably the most important location of your computer because it's where you're saving the most important database on your computer, your translation memories. So I typically keep them all in one spot, and I also have them stored on Google Drive so they're backed up. Now I have come across some problems once upon a time of maybe things slowing down when I was working. Then that's because Wordfast was constantly writing to the database on Google Drive, and Google Drive was constantly synchronizing, and so it slowed things down. So that's something, if you are doing things like that, be careful, and you might want to consider turning off your backup while you're working because it could slow down the machine. And I'll click on OK to save that. And I've just created my translation memory, my first translation memory there. You can see here as well that I could add remote and other already created translation memories, or other translation memories that are associated with other projects as well. And I could also import a translation memory if somebody sent it to me as a TMX file or a TXT file. The glossary, I'll go ahead and I'll create a glossary. And if you remember, I copied onto my clipboard the same name I had earlier. So I'm just going to paste that in and change the M at the end to G. So I know that that's a Wordfast glossary. And the same thing, that's saved in a location on Google Drive, Wordfast, and in the glossaries folder. So all my glossaries will be located in that same location. And I'll click on OK. And a blacklist would be for terms that I don't necessarily, I shouldn't use in my translation. And those could be terms that a client could give to you. Those could be, I've got a set of blacklisted UK English terms when I'm translating into American English. I've got a set of blacklisted American English terms when somebody asks me to translate into UK English. And also have, let's see, what are some other examples of blacklisted terms? Some terms that are spelled correctly, but and the spell checker won't pick up, but you'd want to blacklist them. For example, I had a translation about cloud servers, Amazon web services and cloud servers, and I saw in the translation could servers. And so you might miss that, the L in the wrong place. And so for that particular client, we added could to the blacklist, which would throw a flag every time it comes across could. Sometimes it's a false positive, but we'd much rather have that as a false positive than appear in on a website, purchase this really advanced could server. I'm not going to create the blacklist anymore, or right now, but I will go on and just mention a few other things in this project creation window. You could put reference files on here. This kind of comes back to what I was talking about, the being able to use some of the more advanced features in the tool. If, for example, I'm setting up this project and I want to send it to a colleague, I could export it as a package. And in that package, which is very similar to a zip file, basically, it would take these reference files with it. So all I'd have to do is send the package to a colleague, and then they could open it and start translating. Here, I could pre-translate my files. Sorry, so I'll go back. Here's my source file that was added when I launched the project creation. I could pre-translate the file, so that's going to look into my translation memory, which is empty, and basically not do anything. But if there were things in the translation memory, it would pull them out automatically. And I could also use my primary machine translation engine to pre-translate that file as well, which I'm not going to do. I'll show you how typically if I'm going to be translating, I would use machine translation while I'm translating and not necessarily during this project creation phase. So I'll go ahead and create my project. I'm pretty set with everything. And this is a key thing. I really recommend that you kind of have a good name and know your settings, because once you create your project, it's going to create this folder on your computer, and it's a really bad idea to start changing the folder names and to change the locations, because then Wordfast gets mixed up and it doesn't know where things are. So make sure you're all set with your name and your source and target language, especially your source and target language. Otherwise, you're going to have to restart. So I'll go ahead and click on Create Project. And that tells me, okay, we've created a project. You can see in the background, I've got lots of different projects open here in my project list. What it did is it took that source file and it created a bilingual file. that I'm going to translate then, and later on we're going to get a target file. So we started out with one file, we'll end up with 3. It had the translation memory added, a glossary, and if I click now, you see here it says open created project. Once I click on OK, it's going to open the project and take me from my project list view with all my other projects, and it's going to bring me to the current project view. And I could go back and navigate between the two here. We see that my project is open right now. Before I was hiding all of my projects. That's why you couldn't see them. I just put on a filter right here, and that's why you wouldn't see any of my projects, but now you can see them all. They're right there in the list. Let me just quick look and see what kind of questions we have. I will take one of the questions was, is it a good idea to have one master TM? So I have Spanish to English and English to Spanish. I've not used a TM for each client because I only have about 10 clients, and I like to be able to search all my TM for possible matches. So that's a great question, Anna, and a lot of people ask that question. There's been arguments. Some people say, yeah, just make one big mama translation memory and put everything in there. On the other hand, it really depends. You have to kind of think about the use cases you're going to have for your translation memory later on down the line. And one of those use cases that became obvious to me very quickly in my translation career was that I might want to collaborate with a colleague on a certain translation. And in order to make sure that we were consistent and coherent, I want to share that translation memory with my colleague. And so if I have everything in one translation memory, then I wouldn't be able to send it out. I could, but I'd have to send out my entire translation memory with all my other 9 clients in there. So you could do a hybrid system, which is what I do, as I have field-based memories and I have client memories, and so I'll activate a field-based memory and a client memory at the same time, which allows me to read and write to both of them. So I have like a banking and finance memory, which allows me to leverage what I've translated for other clients, other banks, while I'm working on a particular bank. So I hope I answered that question okay. And Anna says that Dropbox works great for her as well. And yes, you can add multiple memories and multiple glossaries. So I didn't really show that, but actually that's a good segue, and I'll continue on with the demo. When I open my project after creating it, we see that these tabs have changed up here. So we're kind of in the project configuration and setting. And if you notice, if I click on project TM, we can see that TM that I created, and I can actually create another one, or I could add another one. And so I could have multiple TMs running here, in which case, which explains what I would do. I would have my, put on my marketing TM or my tourism TM or whatever it might be. And same goes for project terminology. You could add multiple terminology. In the reports folder, I have that analysis that we already ran earlier that we saw with all of the fuzzy matches. And the reference files, if I had added any reference files, I'd be able to access them quickly and easily through that tab. Not much more to say about the current project view. There's a few tools that we'll look at a little bit later on, but for the most part, we'll click to open this document. And begin our translation. So it says that it's preparing machine translation connections. And what I've done is activate some of the machine translation engines that are available in Wordfast. Something happened with Microsoft. It wasn't happy, but that's okay. So here I see my translation editor. And this is called the TXLF Editor because the file, this document right here, is no longer a Word document, but it's actually a TXLF file. And we can see that if I hover over it, we see the extension TXLF. So let me just show you underneath the hood what happened. when Wordfast created this project, it created a folder on my computer, the same name as the project. We can see it up here. And it copied that file, that source file, into the source folder. And it also created a FR folder for my bilingual and target file. Here's where that TXLF file is located. So there we see that TXLF. It's a very simple text file, and basically what it does is it just contains the source text that needs to be translated. And as I'm translating, it's going to add the target text to it, and it'll be used to create the final target file later on. So it's just think of it right now as a simple text file. And let's see what I was losing my train of thought, but let me get back to where I am here. I just want to show a little bit more of the layout of this file. I think that by default you'll be in the editor layout view, which is table view. So you'll see your source on the left side and your target on the right side. So if you prefer to have a stacked view with your source on top of the target, I think also by default you have a live preview which opens up where you can see your file and how it's going to be, as we translate it, we'll see it being translated. I personally don't like to have the live preview open. I like to look at that later on during my translation, during the revision and proofreading phase. So I'll actually hide that, or close that window, and in the settings, in the preferences, there's a way that I can undo that so it doesn't open automatically every single time, and that would be under your general preferences. So I'll close that and go back to my translation. And so the most important thing, if there's one thing that, for those of you who are beginners out there, one thing that I want you to really remember is make sure that you're using this icon, or actually better than the icon, the shortcut key that it corresponds to, which is Alt and the down arrow on your keyboard. And what that does is it's a very important icon and functionality. It helps you navigate through your document to go from one segment to the next. But more importantly is what it will do is it will actually query the memory each time, and it will save what you're doing into the translation memory as well. So I start out my translation by clicking on the next segment, or I would actually use the shortcut key, Alt down arrow. And what happens is it automatically has reverted to these machine translation engines that I've enabled because it doesn't find anything in my translation memory. So here we have a couple of options, and I can maybe choose the other machine translation. And if I'm happy with that, then I'll move on to the next segment. And here we have my first 60% fuzzy match. And we see that it's slightly different. It's highlighting what's different and what has changed. And I could use that and I could work off of that, or I could use one of the machine translations and work off of that one as well. Yeah, shoot. Okay. So I don't typically translate into French, so please don't judge me. But let's say that is, I'm happy with that. You'll notice that the machine translation is pretty successful at copying the source formatting where it needs to be. So it found that there was a bold term around successful, and it put it around the réussi. And what happens next is when I click on next segment, it's going to record this segment into the translation memory and move me to my next segment. And it indicates that it's been recorded into the memory by turning this into a kind of a purple shade. One of the biggest mistakes that I generally see beginners do is they'll translate something and then they'll say, okay, I'm happy, and I'll make a little change, comme ça. And what they do is they'll take their cursor and they'll click on the next segment. And they don't realize, but by doing that, this segment stays pink. It means that this has not been added into the translation memory. Whereas if I use the shortcut key or I press Alt down, it will take me to my next segment. And it will commit that. Now watch what happens when I click back on that segment. It's actually going to check in the memory, and it finds that what I was recorded into the memory now. So here, and let's say I'm happy with this segment, and so I will commit that as well. At some point, there's one source of confusion for people is the fact that they're saving constantly into the translation memory. By using next segment, it actually commits it to the memory. But another thing that we need to consider is saving this bilingual file. And if I go to the File tab, there's a Save icon here. What this does is it doesn't have any relationship to the translation memory where I'm saving translated sentences each time. It'll just save this bilingual file so that if I open it again, it will be, the first 4 segments would be saved. If I were to close this file without saving right now, if I reopen it, none of these sentences would be in these locations. However, they would be stored in my translation memory. So I'll save that. You can always save it from time to time and continue with my translation. If I want to add a term to the glossary, for example, woman I see is coming back more and more, and I want to add woman and femme as a term in my glossary, I would highlight the source term, highlight the target term, and down here under terminology, I can click on this icon or use my shortcut key, and that will open up a add term window where I can make any changes. If I wasn't happy, sometimes I'll have to remove the S or the pluralized form. I might want to add a description in there. Maybe it's used in a certain context, or I have a reference for it, and I click on OK. And now I'll start seeing different highlighted terms while I'm doing my translation, because Wordfast is recognizing a term in my glossary. And the way glossary typically works is if I'm typing and I want to insert my term, if I type W, it will auto complete that, and I just press enter to insert femme, or I could even type F because it also recognizes, and enter that as well. So W and add my period. So that's how the glossary is going to work. Here I start having more of these 89% different fuzzy matches. So you can see that I've got an 89% now and a 62% match. So this one's really interesting because I see that there's only been some slight changes. And this is a successful woman. So here I see, okay, well now they just switched this, and it's a woman here, and this one should be an homme. And okay, and I'll make that change. Okay, and same thing, fuzzy matches. I have an indication in the TM lookup window. Anna has a question about getting the words into 2 glossaries. So let's say you have 2 glossaries running. That's one of the long-standing improvements that I've been asking developers for a long time, which is to have the ability to add a term to 2 glossaries. So if I had 2 glossaries running and I do my shortcut to add this, instead of having an option, a drop down to add to one or the other, if I could add them to both glossaries at the same time. So if that is an issue that you would like to see as well, you can click on the Wordfast icon here, and go under the feedback section, type in your name and your email, and tell the developers what you want. This really helps them prioritize improvements and features and fix bugs. So it's best to send the application log files and the project files if you can. Do send your feedback to developers. They need that to make the tool better. So here I have to be careful. Okay, Velo. What's different? A bike. Okay, so I'll just keep that the way it is and go on. And okay, a few more things. I'm not going to spend too much time on the actual translation, so I'm going to go really quickly, and I'm going to introduce just a couple of mistakes that sometimes happen while you're translating. And let's see. And I think I'm almost done with my translation. Okay, so I finished my translation. It brings me back to my first segment. And the first thing that I'd want to do is save my file. So I already looked at that a little bit earlier. I already looked at how we would do that by going under the File tab and click on Save. So that I'm sure that now if I close this file and I go for a coffee and I come back later on, it'll open up and everything will be looking the way it was when I left it before. The next thing that I would do, probably first thing right away, is I like to run a Transcheck on that. So I'll click on Transcheck All. Over here, it's under the Review tab. And okay, I have a message about consistency, source, and target, but that's not a big problem right now for this particular file. And I have an HTML report that can look a little bit confusing at first. The first thing it checks is for terminology errors, and it didn't find any terminology errors, which is good. That means that I've been using my terms correctly. I didn't have very many of them in there, though. And it also points out some other potential errors in my file. So if you've been using Wordfast Pro 5 as a beginner, you probably will only have 5, 6, 7, or 8 of these enabled by default. So I strongly encourage you to, when you run Transcheck, you have a message here that says to do it from, no, it's not that. When you run Transcheck, what I recommend that you do is open up your settings, and you have a section here called Transcheck where you can activate a lot more of the Transcheck features. So a lot of them aren't activated by default, and the best way that you can do it is by activating them all and then seeing which ones work and which ones don't work for your language pair. For example, French to English, untranslated text is not a good check for us because there are French words that are used in English and English and French, and so trust me, it doesn't make any sense. So there you can kind of tweak the settings and play with those different Transcheck settings. Let's go ahead and look at the report though and find out what it found as errors. So here, a punctuation check, it finds that I don't have a non-breaking space in front of my question mark, which is required for French. So segment 9, 16, and 17, what I do is I go back here and press Command G or Control G on the PC, Command G on the Mac, and I said segment number 9, so I'll go to segment number 9, and it tells me that I had a mistake. I need a non-breaking space. So you can find a non-breaking space here. There's also a shortcut. It's the same as in Word, I believe. And that will prevent the question mark from breaking to the next line. And it also said that same problem on segment 16 and 17, so I'll go ahead and add my non-breaking spaces here and here. Okay, so there I fixed those. I have a white space check, so here's some more. It's the same exact error that I already saw. Oh, here's one. I have a double white space in segment number 10, so I'll go to segment number 10, and I will get rid of that double white space. If you can't necessarily see it, you can always show white space characters, and there it becomes a little bit more evident and easy to see. And so on and so forth, going through my list of different checks to fix them. Let's continue. Let's look at what else I had. So the double white space, there's those ones I already fixed. Here I have repeated words check, so segment number 11 and 15. So I'll go ahead and fix that, and on segment number 15 as well, fix that. And you'll notice that when I ran the spell check, it gave me these warnings next to the status. And if I click over here on Transcheck, I can see that also in my editor view instead of looking at that HTML report. And once I fix the error, I can refresh it, and that Transcheck warning disappears. So here we have another one, I think, where I needed to fix that white space character. And let's see, I'll refresh that error and it disappears. And then last one, let's see, number difference check. So here we had 4, and it should be 4, and then I should have put 5. So there's telling me that there's some sort of error. The important thing is to know that Transcheck exists, and it's can be a lifesaver. It's small little details, but that's usually what people notice are the small details, a missing punctuation, a double word, a double space, and whatnot. So I'll save that. And now at this point, I would probably go ahead and use the preview of the file, the live preview. And this allows me to look at the file and see what it's going to look like when I'm done using Wordfast. One thing that you'll notice, if you don't change the editor view, if you stay in table view, it becomes very difficult to kind of fix things because it's really hard to see. So oftentimes I'll switch into stacked view when I am seeing the preview like this. It just makes my sentence a little bit wider and bigger. And what I can do is find something here, let's say the one with the stars here, it says 4 billion stars. Let's see. Nope. Here there's 4, so I'm going to put in 4 and move on to the next segment. And we can see that change happen in real time over here as well. So I'll save that, and let's say that I'm pretty much happy. Some people talked about committing all. If you really want to be sure, you could click on the option to commit all of your segments right now, and that would record everything in the memory. You can see now that some of my segments are pink. It's because I was moving into and out of the segments without committing them to the translation memory. So one way to commit all of those changes would be to use commit all. However, I prefer to use a different way of committing them all, and I'll show that to you right now. Well, I'll show you both ways. One would be to commit all. So it says, okay, we're connecting to the TM and we're adding everything and updating the translation memory. And now I see it only went to the last segment. There's a little mistake in there. I think it's my settings. So I'll start at the top and do commit all, and it will commit all of those segments. Okay, we can see them all purple. And then what many people would do, save, and they click on Save File as Translated to generate their final target file. I prefer not to do it this way. If you do, you can always do it like that. But what I don't like about this is that it's very slow to do the commit all, and it also opens this save as window. It doesn't really show me where I should save my final file. So I'll show you the way I prefer to finalize my project. When I'm done with everything, I'll close my document and I'll use the cleanup button over here, icon. And the cleanup allows me to do two things. It allows me to commit all of my segments to the TM, so to update my TM. It will allow me to specify where I want the files to be located, the translated files. If I want them to have a language suffix added to them, which depends on the client, they may or may not want you to change the file names. Do I want the file to be located in the original path of the source file, or do I want to put it in that project folder that I showed you earlier? So I'll typically put it in the project folder. 9 times out of 10, add the language suffix to the translated name. In the TM, I have some options. I can add some attributes. These are just additional metadata, for example, the file name, and I might add an attribute that says, okay, this was delivered or final. You could put the client's name. If you're using a big giant translation memory, you could put the client's name in there for the attribute. These attributes are typically used for extracting data later or for penalizing certain translation units while you're doing your translation. I won't really get into that detail since this is really beginner's session. So I'll click on cleanup. And like I said, that's going to create the bilingual file and update the translation. Remember, you saw how quickly it did that, much. And I was just explaining how the file cleans up, and I wanted to show you where that file now appears. When that cleanup process happened, it automatically created a translated folder for me where I can find that file right here, and I can send that off to my client. This project would be done at this point. I could close the project. It remains on my list, which is nice in case I need to create another project for the same client. What I would do is reuse a project. So I'd reuse that project for Acme, and it automatically creates, selects my translation memory and my glossary, and I just need to add the new files that I'm working on and give it a new name for that project. What about Trados projects sent by the client? That's what I wanted to mention. Good. Thank you. Thank you, Julia. Thank you, Julia, because this is the newest thing in this version that I'm testing for you all right now, which is we have the possibility to import an SDL package, which has been in Wordfast Pro for quite some time now. So you get an SDL Trados package and you can import that and create a project. I believe if you actually drag and drop one, it will launch the import SDL package wizard. And in this latest version, 5.19, which like I said, we're still beta testing right now, you have the option to export that as a return package. And so, you send it back to the client as a return package, and they're none the wiser of whatever tool you used, and they don't really care. In the end, what they want is a return package so that they can update their package on their end and then generate the file and send it off to their client. Thanks again. Take care, everybody, and hope to see you somewhere soon, eventually, when things get back to normal. Bye.